Hello.
Hi,
Hi, Gwen. Good to see you.
same here.
So, here we are for our live stream podcast event. And we get to hear my clock go off because I
Oh,
did not turn it off. So, we can all
it's
hear
such a
my.
lovely sound.
I know. It's my Andy clock. So, was a gift from my family.
hmm I think you've been muted. Can you unmute yourself? Well, I can talk to people and welcome them here while you're trying to figure out about muting yourself. We're glad that you're here. Tonight, we're going to talk into marriages and bereaved couples. While Marcy's trying to figure that out, I think I could just start with a story that really taught me about the differences. It was a real visual for me.
I'm back.
Okay. All right. We're glad.
Sorry, it said your mic has become disconnected, but it really wasn't disconnected. I don't know what the problem is, but now we're good.
Okay. All right.
So, anyway, today we are here to talk about, like you just said,
Mhm.
as a couple and going through this messy, awful grieving process with your loved one.
Mhm.
And how that can be hard because we do all have our own unique journeys. But with that, we need to be able to do it together too.
Right.
So it's kind of doing it together and on your own at the same time. So why don't you go ahead and start with your story?
Well, and I may have shared this with you on some other point before, but I just think it was such a good visual that a couple had a child who died. I think the girl was about 8 years old, and it was a sudden death and very traumatic. And the mom wanted me to come over, and she was very upset with her husband and how he wasn't talking to her. And so when I got to the house, she met me at the door, and right away her anger just at him and how he wasn't grieving and this man is not dealing with this. And she said he's not even going to come into the house to meet with us. But as she was walking me from the door to where we were going to sit, there was a big picture window and a sliding glass door, and I could see the husband out in the backyard chopping wood. And I said, wow, that's a lot of wood. And she said, that's all that man has done since she died is chop that wood. And that's when I said to her, that is a lot of grief in your backyard. And she hadn't realized that maybe that was his style and that he was acting it out physically, where a woman will tend to maybe meet with someone in the living room face to face and have that kind of conversation, and a man may be more active and more physical in their grief. So that was just a real visual for her to see that pile of wood as her husband's grief journey.
Well, I have some bad news that for right now, we are not on Facebook because it is not hooked up properly, even though I checked it just recently.
Okay.
So I think we are only streaming. I don't know where we're all streaming, actually. If we are streaming because you reset up yours? Did you reset up yours?
Reset up. I'm not sure what you meant by that.
To hook up to Grief Guide. Oh, it's not on yours, is what it's not on.
Okay.
We are on Always Andy's Mom, and we are on my YouTube channel, but we are not on your Grief Guide right now.
Okay. That's all right.
That is okay. I am sorry about that because
that's okay.
We just needed to reconnect it, but I can't do that. I think you have to do that.
Okay. So. And you know how technically challenged I am. So let's just dive in and support the people who are listening.
Dive in, and I am so sorry for Gwen's people who are wanting to listen on Grief Guide because it did not work at all. So we will have to get a recording over to her later. But so anyway, you were talking about that he was chopping wood.
Right. And so just that visual of her looking at that as his grief. And I think you said it in the intro just now, is that we are unique and different, and God made us different, but yet we're in marriage and we're in union together. And whether it's the death of a child or anything else, that makes marriage hard. But then
Mhm.
you add the death of a child and it just compounds that.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think one of the things we should dispel right away, though, and I've talked to you about it, and is that there is this myth, and it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy that a marriage is doomed
Mhm.
after the death of a child. Like people just say, "Oh, you're not going to make it." Very few marriages make it through that, and there's not necessarily an increased divorce rate in parents who lose a child as the average population.
Yeah, it's so funny because we certainly thought there was. I mean, I remember the night that Andy died, and we were in that hospital room with Peter because Peter hospitalized for his concussion. And I remember Eric saying to me, "This will not break us." No,
Mhm.
we
Mhm.
made this kind of vow to each other that very night, just, 4 hours
Mhm.
or so after Andy died, that this would not break us.
Mhm.
Because I think we felt that we were under the gun, like
Right.
this is somehow going to wreck our marriage, and we're not going to be able to get through this as a couple.
Mhm.
And because that was kind of what was put in my head, is that's what I
Mhm.
thought. And
Right.
it was months later, actually, I was interviewed on a different podcast, and one of the people said, and that's a myth. There's absolutely no increase in the divorce rate. And I
Mhm.
said, "Oh, really? I didn't know that." I mean,
Mhm.
it was good to know that it wasn't. Although on the other hand, it was a little bit of a good thing to say that to Eric, for us to have that conversation that very night.
Mhm.
Because had that myth not sort of been out there, I'm not sure we would have kind of made that extra vow to each other, because we really did
Mhm.
that
Right.
night, that this will not break us. And it was really a promise to
Right.
each other. And I think that was good that we had. So in some ways,
Mhm.
I'm not sure it's a bad thing that it's out there a little bit, but I'm
Right.
like you, I don't want to feel like you're doomed.
Right. Right.
Hmm.
And I think, making that commitment to heal together is huge. But what I want to also look at is, just as other things in marriage, is that each one of us has our own individual thing. And if I look at it for the example of spiritual growth, I'm not in
Hmm.
charge of whether my husband reads his Bible or prays, right?
Right.
That is his journey and what he does. And I am responsible and accountable to mine. And so someone can stay married with someone and not be in charge of their spiritual growth. You can stay married to someone and make a commitment to stay together and to grieve together the best you can, but still realize that you're not in charge of their emotional health and how well they do their grief work.
Hmm. Hmm. And it's hard
It
because,
is.
I mean, you really want to help them, right? You
Right.
feel like
Well,
you are not doing it right. You are
yeah,
not doing it right. So
how
I've
many
got to do my
times
part.
do women, especially, I hate to pick on us women, leave a book open in the bathroom to a scripture that they want their husband to read, and, like, not just hitting him over the head with the book, but leaving it open, so hoping that he'll grasp this, all important message.
Well, and it's not even just that. I mean, it's simpler things too. Like I'm just going to give an example for dinner tonight. So
Okay.
dinner tonight, I was making some pasta. I had Eric pull the bread out of the oven and cut the bread, which he has done before. And when we've got a long, thin baguette, he will cut it exactly perpendicular. And you have these teeny, teeny, tiny little pieces of bread that I have laughed at him before, like, just cut it at an angle so you can have a decent sized piece of bread, right? But he makes these little ones, and Peter laughs at it. Well, today he cut it at such a severe angle that these slices of bread were humongous. They were
Uh-huh.
so crazy huge. Peter comes downstairs and he starts laughing because I looked at the bread and I thought, I'm saying nothing, right? Because
Mhm.
I have criticized the bread before. I'm not saying anything. Well, Peter starts laughing about the ridiculousness of this huge bread. But it was like poor Eric, he either cut it way too small, or now he's way too big and he's just not doing
Mhm.
it, in Peter's mind, the way mom does it.
Right.
So anyway.
Yeah, and those are good things. Like, sometimes we have to let things go, but some things are important to us. But I
Right.
think, when it comes to hurting is realizing that we don't want to come to any faulty assumptions, like this woman who met me at the door and said he's not grieving. That was a faulty assumption.
Mhm.
Or, wrong conclusions, or reaching these wrong conclusions about how someone's doing. So that does lead us to the fundamentals of marriage anyway, is we have to communicate.
Right.
So this is where I'm at. So I'm just going to take spiritual growth because I started with that example and it seems to be, less, I think it's a good parallel. If the wife says, I'm going to go to church, and he says, that's not really my thing. But you communicate, this is what's important to me. This is what I'm going to do. Where are you at? And you have those conversations to kind of understand where each other's at. We need to do that in our grief journey as well.
Right.
And say, this is where I'm at. Where are you at? This is what I'm feeling. And because we are so different as male and female, we're going to see that in grief too.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
So women tend to be more social. Friendships, we tell each other everything. Even in an office, I've said this before, but in an office, women will go in and say, I'm feeling kind of bloated. I have a little headache today. I'm feeling a little off, or my husband and I had a fight. A man will go into work. He's not going to announce what happened at home. Not a
Yeah.
chance.
Mhm.
And so right there, we're two fundamentally different, where we share and kind of ooze stuff, and men don't necessarily do that. So again, they're not going to change and do that in their grief either.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, and I'm not saying that all men, that means that they're not emotionally, that they're emotionally crippled, or that they can't do it. I've seen a lot of men do a lot of amazing, outward expression, but it does kind of go against their norm. It's probably one of the first times that something so heightened has happened that they're willing to sit in a group and talk about things.
Well, I even think on the podcast, I mean, how many more women do I have come on, share their
Right.
stories than men? I have a lot
Mhm.
more women come
Right.
on. Um, although it's interesting because when I do have a man on, women will like to listen to that perspective a lot, I think.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I will tend to have more listeners even listen to the dads than to the moms because I think it is thought to be a little more unusual. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of women think maybe I'll get this guy's perspective because I'm having a hard time understanding
Mhm.
what my husband's going through
Right.
or even talking to him
Mhm.
about it and just seeing if another dad's perspective might help them a little bit.
Absolutely. And it does give some insight into the fact that men are protective by nature. That's the way that they are. And they are more self sustaining, like feeling they have to take care of, protect the
Mhm.
family, provide for, do all of that. So when the family has emotional pain, they want to protect them from that. So even sharing their own emotional pain seems to go against what they're trying to do, is protect their family. So I think they will keep that maybe a little closer. So when you do hear a man sharing that, it just gives that light to, oh, they do have those feelings. They
Mhm.
just might not
Mhm.
express it in the same way we do.
Well, and it is really helpful because even some have been on and talked about that struggle, about
Mhm.
how, it took a good amount of time. It took a lot of work. It took
Mhm.
really re-examining yourself to be able to open up in that way because it's not what comes naturally and it's not
Mhm.
what society expects maybe.
Right. Yeah. Um you and I talked about this, but I had read a book. Now I Love and Respect. So it's kind of that cycle where the Bible says, women, respect your husbands, and husbands love your wives, because men need respect and women need love. So those words were on purpose. So it's a book. I think it's Eggers is the author. I can't think of his first name, but anyway, in there, he does talk about the way men and women communicate. So even if it's not necessarily about grief, it is helpful to read some of those communication books for marriage, because that will translate over. But not only does he talk about marriage, but he also talks about women raising sons, and how if we want our sons to talk to us, they might not be as comfortable to say, let's sit down and let's have a talk, right?
Mhm.
That face-to-face communication. So he talks in there that if you want to get the man in your life to talk, find an activity side by side to do with them.
Mhm.
And, even driving in the car because they don't have to look at you.
Right.
And so those kinds of things. So even taking some of those tools from marriage and raising sons will help us in realizing maybe some pointers that will help us with grief as well.
Mhm. So back to your chopping wood example,
Yes.
that you know that if he's out there chopping wood, maybe you
She
can
could
go
go
out and
sit
help
on a
chop
log.
wood. Yeah.
Or chop the wood yeah, and
Or
just
yeah, go
have
out
that
there and just
activity.
start moving the
Yep.
wood or doing something, and that it can
Mhm.
get you kind of together,
Right.
um, in just doing something together.
Mhm.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think about Eric and I, and a lot of what was important is just being together and not even
Mhm.
saying anything. Like we
Right.
didn't even have to say much of anything
Mhm.
at all.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's interesting because when I read about it and when I've had those honest talks with bereaved couples, the bedroom becomes a place of so many different things. It becomes a place of silence, maybe just physical closeness. It becomes a place of crying out. It becomes a place of, you know, coming together sexually, and it has so it's just a time where, like you said, sometimes you don't say anything.
Mhm.
You're together and having that. And I think, um, it can go the whole gamut too. That's the other part that makes grief so exhausting and makes it so overwhelming is it can go the whole gamut. And what made me just think of this point that is good for all bereaved people, but I think in couples too, is that sometimes you just have to set your grief down. And I think sometimes for our marriage, if one spouse seems to be maybe grieving more intently, it's lasting longer for them, that the other spouse may be frustrated. I've heard this kind of thing,
Mhm.
like, "Oh, but sometimes we do have to set it down and just do something fun with our spouse too, and have that time where we can just be a couple and do something where we're not necessarily bringing the grief into that our marriage needs that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that though, because then the guilt comes in, right?
Right.
The guilt starts to come
Mhm.
in.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That I shouldn't be doing this. Why am I doing this?
Right.
So I
But,
try
one
to
of
get
my
past that.
suggestions with that is go someplace nobody knows you. I mean, don't go to your local pub or saloon that you go to every Friday night to have pizza, to
Yeah.
have your time where you're trying to just act like a fun couple. Go someplace where no one knows you. Because I remember one time, us needing to get away with, we had all the years of infertility, and then we have, our infant loss and our death, and then we have 3 kids in 5 years. That when we first went away as a couple, I said to Mike, "I don't think we should talk about kids. That's all we've talked about for how many years?"
Mhm.
So we went away and people asked us, "Do you have kids?" I said, "No." I because
Whoa.
I didn't wanna have to go there. I didn't wanna have to explain. It was I was tired. Like, I needed to replenish, and we needed to be about us, and he kind of freaked out because he's not used to me lying, first of all. So when people asked us, I just said, "No, we don't have children," because
Wow.
I just needed a break.
Mhm.
So
I
no
think
one knew
about
me.
I think about well, just obviously I think about the two of us, about Eric and me, and a couple of
Mhm,
examples come to my mind. First of all, we've been doing this now 3.5 years, and I feel
mhm,
like we're pretty open with each other and talk to each other. But yet, yesterday, I I saw a baby in the office, and I walked in, and it was just a little kid to check for an ear infection,
mhm.
but he looked just like Anthony
Mm,
as a baby. I mean, it was crazy to me. And the whole visit, I'm in there and I've got to clean out his ears and I've got to talk to mom and I've got to keep myself together. But all I'm thinking is, this
mm.
looks just like my little boy.
Mhm, mhm,
And I'm missing him terribly. And I actually left the room. I started to cry, which I haven't cried after a patient in a while. And I just started crying because it just looked just like him. And so I got home that night and I said, I saw a patient this morning. Gosh, he looked just like him. And I started to
Mm.
cry. And he said, oh, I've been having a really hard time lately. And I didn't know. I didn't know. And I had too. I mean, the last few days have been just really just trying. And we went to see my daughter away at college, and he said, we went to see her, and I just felt like Andy should be there. He said,
Mhm.
I'm just noticing he's not there, and I'm just missing him so much.
Mhm.
And yet he didn't say that to me. He didn't even tell me until I mentioned to this little boy that got me
Mhm.
so upset in the day. And I thought, I've been doing this 3.5 years, and still he felt
Mhm.
like he needed to protect me from that
Right.
and not tell me. And me the same, right? I
Yeah.
had been having a really hard time the last few days to a week as well. And I didn't tell him until I had that event that put me over the
Right.
edge. And then I did share that with him. But thought, here we are still
Yeah.
trying to protect each other and
Mhm.
trying to not get the other one down. And I mean, it felt good that we did talk about it though. I
Yeah.
mean, we just
And
had a
that
little
brings
talk about it, and it made me feel a little better because I was feeling like, gosh, I'm so sad lately. I'm just missing him so much. And yet I don't want to act any different, right? I don't want him to know that I'm feeling much worse because it's been 3.5 years. So anyway,
right.
that's kind of what was going through my own head. But yeah, I wonder if that was a little bit what was going through his as well. You know?
Yeah. You were a little choppy in there, it froze up a couple times, but I
Oh, I'm
think I
sorry.
followed you to the point that there are 2 points that that brings up. One is that when you do finally talk about it, you realize that you're not that far off. Like, he had had an experience, then he could share with you. So, if we're afraid to bring it up because we think our spouse is doing well, realizing that even if they are having good days, they're still open to hearing where we are, but most often they're the people that can relate the most because you were all at that college visit, visiting your daughter and having those
Hmm.
reminders. It was happening to both of you. So it's probably not that far off from what they're experiencing too, which leads me to the next thing is to name it. Like, name it something so that you can say, I'm having one of those days or I had one of those moments. And then they'll know exactly what you're talking about. And then they can say, oh, I had one too, or just to kind of touch in with each other without having to explain things, maybe just to say, I'm having one of those moments.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, we'll just say we're kind of having an Andy day. That's what I'll say to my
right.
kids,
Yep. Okay. I
because
like
that,
that.
hmm just
Mhm.
because when they get more emotional or more upset, and you don't want to say too much, but
Yeah.
it can be easier and safer to say, "Are you having
Yeah.
an Andy day today?"
Yeah.
And then that will make
Mhm.
them know that you kind of get it and you're there,
Right.
and then they can tell you more if they want to tell you more, but they don't have to tell you more if they can't.
Mhm.
I think you
Yeah.
can do that the same with your spouse,
Yeah.
right? Just be able to say, just
And
like you said, to name it, which gives them permission to talk about it if they want to, but it's not a requirement.
yeah.
It's
And then
different than
again,
telling, tell me about it. What are you
mhm.
thinking?
Yeah.
What? Yeah.
And a lot of this goes back to the same kind of things that we would do in all other aspects of marriage is honoring someone else and being kind and, just some good techniques. And so honoring someone else's place where they are and the days that they're having, um, is just allowing them space. Like, if someone's angry about something, sometimes we just need to give them their space, or they just, don't talk to me right now, and we honor that, right? We need to do the
Yeah.
same thing in grief sometimes, is that same honoring of where they're at and what they um need to talk about. Um one of my thoughts though is just a few of the don'ts,
Okay.
um, for marriages is we don't want to turn somewhere else for all of our support away from our spouse. And somewhere else could be drugs and alcohol, where, okay, I listen to you, but then when I deal with my stuff, I'm turning to something unhealthy for my support. And so we have
Okay.
to watch that because that can be a temptation that one person carries for the other, and then they don't have a healthy place. But also in turning to watching where we turn to, sometimes having help outside the family is really valuable, like having someone else to process with. Or if you go to a support group and your spouse doesn't go, that's okay, because you're getting the support that you need outside of your spouse. But what we don't want is for you never to lean on your spouse and go completely where you're just only confiding in others and I'm only sharing with others where I'm at. And with them, we just pretend that we're okay, because
Yeah.
that's not healthy either. And you can
Yeah.
see that. I mean, that
I
doesn't take
like that though. That's really important to bring up, I think.
Mhm.
That you have to
Mhm.
try to be honest. I mean, you don't need to put everything on that person because that's a
Mhm.
lot, especially for if they really just
Mhm.
can't handle that. But you
Right.
need to put something on there or you will end up growing apart.
Right. Yep.
And that's back to this whole, the whole divorce situation, and that the divorce rate is no higher because you can not talk to your spouse about many, many problems. But
Mhm.
this could be one that you would do as well, right? So it's not.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So we wanna have that balance between what do you need, what do I need, and what do we need together and how we do that. And that does come down to those conversations. Like, I need to be in a group. I need to go to this. And someone else doesn't, but hey, will you come with me for the first few sessions, or will you come to at least this? Or, so it takes those kinds of conversations to have together, to honor each other's, to do parts together, and then hold parts that are separate away from our spouse.
Yeah. That reminds me a lot of Grief Share, the Grief Share
Mhm.
program
Yep.
that they have.
Mhm.
They've got a Surviving the Holidays one, and it has you definitely do that. This is what I need to do for the holidays. This is what I
Oh,
would like to do for the holidays. This is what I absolutely can't do. And
yeah.
so I think you can sit down and really have that list with your
Mhm.
partner and say, this is what I need to do in my grief. This is what I sure would like to be able to do with
Mhm.
you in my grief. This is what I just absolutely can't.
Right.
And if you put it in those three categories, and I think the important thing is to actually have three categories
Mhm.
because you don't want to have your spouse is just the everything goes in the I can't do that category.
Right.
You've got to
Yeah.
be able to say, we
Mhm.
are both going to have a list with three categories in it, and then let's see where the commonalities lie and where
Mhm.
we might be able to do some of these things together. But I think
Yeah.
that's important too to say,
Mhm.
because you could do both ways, right? You could have one spouse say, whatever you want, I will just do it. I will do it. And
Yeah.
if it makes them miserable, they're just going to do it. And they're going to have it
Mhm.
all in that category of, I will do this. I will do all of this.
Mhm.
That's not healthy for that person if there are some of those things are really, really painful and
Right.
too difficult to do. So be honest with yourself about what you want to do, what you could do,
Mhm.
and what you can't.
Yep. Absolutely. And, when you brought up, with the grief share with the holidays, and we talked about the holidays, again, it does come back to all this communicating about what I can and can't handle, what can you handle, and it takes work to do that. But again, as we said before, marriage is work. And, in order to have a healthy marriage through grief or through financial problems or job loss, it takes communication and work.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. So, um, but, again, making sure that you're not um, going too far apart from each other. And I love what you and Eric decided that night. Like, yeah, we're gonna be different, and we're both two individual people, but as a couple, we're gonna stay together in this.
Yeah.
And it kind of becomes, they talk about non-negotiables in marriage, and I hope our future what am I trying to say? Future marriage counseling, and I think we've improved. Then in our day, you just said, "Yeah, I want to marry that person," and the pastor married you. But now they actually do some really good classes and work, and they
Mhm.
talk about non-negotiables, because what are the things that are really important to you that you can't budge on, and having those non-negotiables. What Eric said to you that night was a non-negotiable that you were both making that commitment is we're not going to break up
This
over
won't break us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, my husband and I have talked about non-negotiables that we can fight and we can, have all sorts of things, but divorce isn't on the table.
Yeah.
So, that was not even an option, but for some marriages, it is an option right from the beginning. It's up for negotiation. One of the things I was reading not too long ago, is that some couples aren't sure they're going to make it anyway.
Yeah.
They're not sure.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
something like this makes it harder and they may end up getting a divorce, but were they headed that way anyway? So that,
Yeah. Well,
they
and the other thing that I think can be a challenge, and I've talked to some moms, especially that are like this, that their spouse is not the father of their child who
Oh,
died.
yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
And that's so hard, I think,
Yes.
too, because they're not going to grieve in the same way.
Exactly.
I mean, especially if it's someone that they haven't known for even that
Mhm.
long, or
Yep.
it's
Mhm.
just on the weekend or every other week or whatever.
Mhm.
I think that adds a huge level of complication.
A huge one. But it would go back to honoring. So let's say you are the new spouse who has
Mhm.
married someone and their child is 19 and you have only known them for 3 years or whatever. Um, Honoring that relationship and who that person was. So my sister, after her divorce, married a widowed man. And when she called me up and said, I really like this guy, but he's a widow. What do I need to know? And I said, his wife has a place. Your ex-husband's pictures aren't going to be up at your house because when you get a divorce, you don't keep the pictures up of
Yeah.
your ex-spouse. But I said, when you go to his home, the pictures will be up because she has a place and you need to honor her place.
Mhm.
So it's the same thing in this, is honoring that relationship, even though you didn't live it or know it, but to try to take away. And I've watched a lot of people try to take away from the relationship. And I say to the bereaved person, you gotta hold that tight. You can't let anyone take that away from you or minimize that. So I think that's just a stand that you need to take. So the person,
Mhm.
you can't expect them that they're going to understand and know how you feel, but you also don't have to surrender it and say, okay, I will minimize this because they don't know this person's. Does that make sense? Like, I
Uh,
hope I'm not talking in
no,
circles.
I think that makes sense. I
Mhm.
think it really does.
Mhm.
Right. Because I think you can do it both ways, right? You can be like,
Mhm.
well, you just don't understand because he's not your son. He's my
Right.
son. He's not your son. Well, you need to let them be able to still try to be there for you in that
Mhm.
same way. And
Mhm.
even though that pain isn't the same, it's not the same for anyone anyway. We've already
Right.
talked about it.
Yeah.
Everyone's grief is unique.
Mhm.
So, my pain is not the same as Eric's pain. Our grief, even though we grieve the same person, even though we're both his parents, it's not exactly the same. So I don't want people to really jump to, well, if he's not even his father, then he really can't understand me.
Mhm.
Now, you gotta still let him come in and be what he can for you.
Mhm.
But again, understand that he is in a different place. It isn't the
Right.
same, but we can be there for each other, but we don't
Mhm.
we're we can be there for each other, but we're not
Right.
each other,
Yeah. And
right?
I think this is allowing me to go back to some things that I teach with people. And one of them is that expectations that we have, not only the expectations for ourselves and how, we always should on ourselves and what we should be doing, but
Yeah.
oftentimes we put expectations on other people. And sometimes they're not realistic. No matter what, those people can't live up to our expectation of how they should meet our every need. And that's one of the things I learned early on in marriage is it's not my husband's responsibility to meet my every need. It's not.
No.
Um, and so um, just realizing that I lost my train of thought when I said that. We have to watch what our expectations are of the people in our life too, that they're always going to be there and they always have to stop everything they're doing and always, say the right thing, do the right thing,
Mhm.
because that's not realistic.
No. But you're
But I
right, we
think
do have these expectations. I even think,
Mhm.
and this is totally unrelated to grieving as a couple now, but I think of, my mother died when
Mhm.
I was 21. She was 42. So obviously, my grandmother lost her daughter. So
Mhm.
I had this sort of expectation that she would understand more because she
Mhm.
lost her daughter. And so when I lost my son, she would be able to totally kind of get it and understand me.
Mhm.
And it turns out that that wasn't really the case.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Um, and that's why when we look at our support team or who's around us, I think we have to have a variety of people. So we talk about, you need people to meet your physical needs, you need people that meet your emotional needs. We have people that we connect to spiritually that are the people that
Mhm.
keep us accountable spiritually. I think it is the same thing in marriage that your spouse might not be all the people to
Yeah.
fit all in those
Right.
baskets.
Right. I
Sometimes
was
in our
thinking that
grief,
same thing.
yeah,
Hmm.
sometimes in our grief, we have to say, I can go to them for these things, but for this, I go to my grief group or I go to this group of
Right.
moms, or this is
Like
what I
he
do.
can't be my spiritual support person, or
Yeah,
he can't be,
right.
what that person
Yeah.
can't be to you. That's okay. They don't have
Mhm.
to be everything to you,
Right.
but you do want them to be some of them.
Yes, and not pull away from them completely where you're putting all of your and I do think the vulnerability, we talk about physical affairs, but I do think the vulnerability of emotional affairs that if you start confiding in someone, especially if it's, someone of an opposite gender, that's a huge temptation and that we need to stay away from not, going um to someone else outside of our marriage for our emotional support if they're of the opposite
Wow.
gender. I think that's a red flag. Can put us in a spot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, I had so many thoughts going through. I
I was gonna
probably
say you have more notes. I know you do.
I do. I I don't even know where to start with it. It just is going back to some of these things, and I think where I'm going is that I think there's some listeners who probably have some questions that say, "But you don't understand.
Yes.
I'm here in this marriage, and I am completely alone. This
Mhm.
person doesn't get me." And I
Mhm.
think we have to hear that. And I think you know, um, we're not getting any questions, but I just want to go to that question and say, we want to hear you. We do hear, like I've heard that.
Yeah. Oh,
And
I've had people reach out to me and say
okay,
that very thing. I mean, say that
okay.
very thing. Like,
Mhm.
I just feel so alone.
Yeah,
It's been moms saying, I
yeah.
don't think he's grieving. He doesn't want to do anything.
Mhm.
He doesn't even
Mhm.
want to look at pictures. He doesn't want to do
Yeah,
anything. What do I do?
right.
So Gwen, what do we
I
do?
know, I know. Well, it's a couple things. I think that we continue to communicate what our needs are the best that we can, not saying you don't listen to me or you don't talk because that's the wrong message, right?
Right.
Rather than to say, I
This
need,
is what I really need. I know.
I need to be able to say their name or look at some pictures with you or share when and how is the best way for us to do that. And
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I think that
Mhm.
that's the best thing to say is to, this is what I really need. How could I do that in a way that's easier for you?
Right, right. But then the other part says, um, how, understanding that I can get some support other places. These are some things I need from you. Um, boy, I'm having problems with my train of thought tonight. Oh, I know. This is what it was. Maybe it's late. I don't know. At a certain age, you probably shouldn't talk after 8 o'clock at night. I know what it was. It was the fact that, um, oh my goodness. Oh, it left me again, is modeling it. So oftentimes when other people, they might not know what to do, right?
Mhm.
So model it and when they do get it right, say, you know what? You did a great job. And that's really all I needed was for you to be able to listen to me for a few
Right.
minutes and just do that and thank them when they get it right. And it's kind of
Yeah.
that teaching and that modeling and say, okay,
Mhm.
this is what we do. And
Th-
I do that with my children often,
I
and,
was just going to say that.
yeah, and so, just
Positive
having an
reinforcement.
Yeah,
Uh,
an honest
as a
conversation.
pediatrician, what do I talk to parents about?
Yeah,
Positive reinforcement. When they do something
yeah,
that you really like them doing, tell them that you really
right.
appreciated them doing it that
Yeah,
way. Positive reinforcement is the best way to help someone, you know.
learn.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
much better than a negative.
I don't have a specific example, but I know recently with our college age daughter, we had a discussion and I said, "Honey, it's okay that we're having this discussion because this is what happens in families and sometimes you have to have these discussions to get to this place, but it's good." Then when it was over with, I had her look back and say, "See, if we had just blown up or walked away or whatever by just digging in a few more steps, look how far we went." And
Yeah.
she's like, "Okay, I get it." So again, that takes work. And that's the hard part when you're grieving. I've just recently become aware again of how exhausting grief is. So I think, again, for the listener, they're going, "Oh my goodness, I'm
Yeah.
so exhausted." And now I have to be the one modeling the behaviors and reinforcing the good. But um, let's
Well,
try not to overthink it and make it too hard. And there's a lot of grace in relationships that needs to be given both ways.
and that's an excellent point too, right?
Mhm,
That we need to work on giving each other grace,
mhm.
giving
Yeah,
ourselves grace for when we screw
yeah.
up, apologizing for when we screw up, just being open about that, about
Mhm.
mistakes we make. Hmm.
One of the thoughts that did come back to me that I was struggling with is that, we talked about the fact that men might not be as open as women and talking, but I think sometimes we take that so far that we never ask them, "How are you?"
Yeah,
Right? Because
yeah,
in their silence, we take it as they're doing okay, they don't wanna talk about it, but sometimes I've learned with, you know, um, the person I
yeah.
live with is to say, "No, wait a minute, everyone's talking about the kids or me or this or that. How are
How are
you?
you?
Like, how is this for you?" And just to ask the question.
See, that's a good reminder for me. I mean, I should have done that. I should do that more. I love that. Yeah.
You froze up there. Can you say that
Oh, I
again?
just said no. That's really helpful to me. I just
Mhm,
as a good reminder to be able to do that.
mhm.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, and just to check in and have those check-in points and yeah. Um And we'll be glad we did. I was giving a presentation yesterday and just talking about, certain things. Well, this is the example I use, Marcy, you're gonna love it, from my kid's pediatrician. When we go for well baby checks, right? They ask the questions. Do you have working smoke detectors? Do you wear a bike helmet? Do you wear a life jacket? All these things that they ask us, right?
Hmm.
Those are protective factors to protect the child. You wear a seatbelt to keep them safe. There are things in life that are protective factors. And one of the ones that I was talking about for them, I was talking to healthcare workers, is that some things used to just be bonuses, but now in the stress of today's world, they're actually required. Like you have to do these protective factors to survive this crazy world and of COVID and everything. So I was talking about exercise and the fact that even though I'm new to exercise and I'm new to the experience of it, and I say new, the last couple of years integrating it into my life routinely. I have this woman when I do a workout, she says no one ever regrets a workout. And I've listened to her say that for like a year and a half thinking, lady, that but you know what? It's true. Once you start that critical inch, like moving a parked car, it's that first inch that's so hard.
Hmm.
But once you move your body, you don't regret it. So
Yeah.
when I'm relating this back to your marriage right now or all this stuff we're talking about might feel like that parked car, but once you do the push and you get past that first critical inch, you're not going to regret having open communication. You're not going to regret taking time to list what I need, what I don't need, and having these hard conversations. Because, truth be told, it actually makes it easier and it's better for you than just passively going, well, we'll just see what happens and hope to God this all turns out okay.
Yeah. Hmm. Hard
So,
work.
yeah, I'm trying to be encouraging in this, right?
No,
We're trying
I
to,
think it's
yeah.
very encouraging. Hmm.
Yeah, we want to be encouraging to those marriages, understanding that this is hard, but it is worth it.
Worth it.
anything worth having takes some work. It's
Mm-hmm.
not easy.
No.
Yeah.
No.
That's why one of the things that I've learned about exercise and eating healthy is you can look at people and go, how did they get that body? They probably worked for it really hard, right? And sometimes I think people look at marriages and look at things and say, how do they have that? They probably worked really
Work at
hard at
it.
having some of these tough conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I love that. Did you have other points that you wanted to make?
Yes. Well, the last one, we have some time left, but I do kind of want to talk about something. You and I were talking about resources. And I
Mhm.
think to those people, a couple of things. I mean, first, they can always email either one of us, both of us together. We have conversations with people all the time, which I think we're going to address a little bit, a few of those coming up.
Mhm.
But we have conversations with people. If you didn't want to share your thing in the comments or you have something that you're struggling with, you can ask us. We're not saying we know the answers, but we want to be able to help you and your
Yes.
marriage find the answer and the support. So let us again pour into you and be encouraged to you.
Mhm.
But with that, I have one resource I wanted to talk about that, we both kind of know the gentleman who started it, but it's called Bereaved Dads Network. And you can find them online and they're based here in West Michigan. But they have a lot of virtual groups for dads. And I believe when you read their story, it really came from that thought of two things. One was one of the men, his now wife is not the mother of his child who died. So she wasn't wanting to go to a support group. And where did he go, kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then the
Mhm.
other gentleman, his um heaviness of his grief was the fact that he felt like he had to carry his wife and other children so much that he just needed a space. So they
Right.
created this. So they have coaching, that you can be coached individually. They have helpful links. Like I mentioned, virtual groups, they have in-person groups, they bring in speakers. They have, really good stuff. So I'd encourage you to look at the Bereaved Dads Network. Maybe what
Mhm.
I should do is post the link in the comments. Would that help if I knew
Yeah.
how to?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Put that in the comments.
Um,
And then the other thing that we wanted to make sure to bring up today too is Starlight Ministries has coming up on Friday, March 11th, their bereaved parents dinner. It was formerly a bereaved couples dinner, but now they're just doing bereaved parents. So you don't have to be part of a couple to come. But they will be talking about some of these very same topics of
mhm,
bereaving as a couple, and then just a night out kind of to go with your spouse or
right.
even yourself, just to be with other bereaved parents who are going through the same kind of struggles, because that can always be so helpful. Mhm.
Mhm. I don't know how to get into the comment section. I can see it, but I don't know how to get there. So
Oh,
I
you
I
can.
was half technically okay.
Okay, if you just click
Um,
on comments, you should be able to post a
yeah,
comment.
I thought
You
I
didn't?
could.
Okay.
I'll see again,
I
but
can. What do you want me to write?
well, I copied and pasted the
Bereaved
tab.
dad.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Well,
it's bereaveddadsnetwork.com.
okay.
All right, thank you. So yes, this the dinner, um there was something else that we were going to talk about. I think one of the things that I will just address when I mentioned that people reach out to both of us, and we've talked about it tonight from the very beginning. When Eric said, let's do this together, and I mentioned that commitment to heal. Um,
Mhm.
we
Let
do
me put
have
that up there.
a commit.
bereaveddadsnetwork.com, right?
Correct.
Mhm. Yep.
Um, That commitment to heal. Well, I got a comment from someone, and I just want to address it because I think it's a good one. It
Mhm.
was no way taken like as an offensive, but she said, um, when you say healing, I don't understand that. Everyone talks about healing, and I feel I'm never going to get there. And I had to explain that when we use the word healing, I think, especially as bereaved parents, we think that it means that life's going to go back and we're going to get back to the way we were and everything's going to be good. Um, and that's not what
I
we mean by healing.
Right. I think they might think healing means wholeness or back to exactly where we
Right.
were. Or I was thinking of really is when you have a wound and say in the book and it's healed magically, it's away and it looks beautiful and your skin looks like it not anything. But in real life, that's not how it looks.
Right.
In real life, when you heal up, you've got an ugly looking scar.
Right.
Funny because Gwen told me about this, and I'm seeing patients at the house, and I that very next looking in at the ears of a kid to just their he's like a 10 kid. I'm looking at his ears. He has the most scarred, terrible looking eardrums. I mean, they're fine. He hears fine, but he had a lot of ear infection. He definitely had more than one set of kid because he had scarred up eardrums. So I said something to him. But what hit me is that this is what great example for what you just said. Outside, you can't see a scar at all.
Right.
No idea. You don't even see the skin, right? No way to see how bad looking his ears are unless you really get in there. Look. So that's what it is like with our healing too, is that we will have this healing. And in some ways it's hard because from the outside, you do look the same. I think about that. I think when patients see me, they think, Dr. Larson, she's just the same as she always was. No, I'm not.
Right.
I'm not. You can't see a scar on the outside, so you can't see how scarred I am. I am healing, but it's a messy kind of healing. It's not beautiful. Outward healing. There's, you know what I mean? It's messy. And so I think that's what people need to remember, that it just that when we say that, we know it's messy. And we know it's,
and this is how I explained it. To the person is that you're just not bleeding all over the place anymore. Because in the early part of our grief, it just it has to ooze out, and but there comes a point where it's not oozing all the time, but it is always there. And so when I always think about healing is we don't have to bleed all over the place, but we are still wounded. I mean, that we're always, going to be wounded. So, but that commitment to heal, and again, I used this yesterday in my presentation, is what are you aiming for? What are we aiming for? And we can aim for healing. Like, I want to get there. I want to get to the point that I'm not bleeding all over the place. And I want to get to a point where what's hard is if someone says, I don't want to get there. And some people do make that decision. And I think that will be a challenge to a marriage when someone says, I'm never going to get over this. And I'm never going to be better.
Right.
Now, again,
you're never going to be the same.
Forget, and you're never going to be
the same. You are not going to be the same. But it doesn't mean that you should stop living.
And that you have to stay wounded and stay in the pain as intensely as
every moment. Because we don't want to be in pain every moment.
No.
And so the other comment I wanted to talk about too was somebody else that wrote to me. So recently I had some women on who were talking about the loss of their children, and the one son had died from a drug overdose, and she had made the point of can be difficult with other people when your child had a hand in it, like meaning that they were responsible in some way for the death happening. And I made the point that the same thing could be said for suicide. And I did not mean when I said that was an all-inclusive list, because it's certainly not. I mean, you go out to, there are many accidental injuries, there's all sorts of things, right? There are all sorts of reasons that you can end up kind of being responsible for your own death. I think about, adults who smoke or, do other bad habits that end up leading to an early death. So I was not trying to single out those things. And I think it was thought that maybe I was singling them out as somehow that grief being different. If anything, I think those types of grief can be a little more challenging. In any of those circumstances, they can be more challenging. just because I think you can end up having some, I don't know. I think society can look at things a little bit differently, but overall, it's the same grief, and our grief is the same. And no matter how we got there, it's the same. And so I don't want people to feel like if they're, depending on how their child died, things are somehow different, because they're not. They're not.
But I also think that people who have experienced death by suicide, it has been a society norm to say, well, they made that choice, so they are defensive against that because they feel
or
like
the
people are
drug
blaming their
overdose.
child. Right, exactly. And so they do stand on that. Their child was clouded by their, despair and hopelessness. They didn't, wasn't as a concrete choice as people make it seem. So I do think they do stand on that a little bit. And I understand that. I think one of the things that you and I have talked about, and I just going to ask our listeners and understand that we're human, and sometimes we're in conversations and we're saying things and they're not meant to be all inclusive or always this way. But as I tell my kids, you got to be a little bendy. And so sometimes we forget that, when we say something, it still has a bend to it. Like there's always different factors and it's different for everybody.
But if we say something that you feel like maybe we shouldn't have said or whatever,
absolutely,
go ahead. Send me an email. I would love to be in communication. I could always learn, and I'm always learning and trying to do more things and do things better. And if you have questions,
well, we both have that teach me. And that's, and when I tell people I'm not on here as the grief expert, because people have taught me and they continue to teach me. And I'm thrilled about that.
And I love to learn, and I love to hear from people.
And as long as we are alive, we have things to learn. And I will go back to what we started with tonight. As long as we're in a marriage with a partner, there's always going to be something we have to learn. We're never going to master that. So again, we're back to the fact that this is a hard relationship anyway. And then, just to be aware of that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Gwen. And I look forward to our next one will be, I think it's March 31st. That's also a Tuesday. I'm pretty sure that's our date.
I have March 29th.
Oh, but you know what? You're right. It's the 29th. March 29th will be our next day. And I think what we'll be discussing then is faith and the role of faith, because we have not had a full episode on that before. But if you have other questions, concerns, always pop on, always ask questions. We just love to hear from people. So thank you much.
Yep. Okay. Take care.